Great if you could sit down with David, because David's the guy that's been putting together all the technical aspects. Oh, okay. Linda's I'm just here to run the house. That's right. Oh, yeah. Good on you.
David, I'll introduce you. He'll be doing most of the speaking, so make yourself known.
Check 1, 2. Oh, that's too loud, isn't it? One, two. Check, 1, 2. Last minute technical check, folks, very important. Thank you very, very much. I'm just listening with this ear to what Linda's saying, because I think she's saying it'd be a good idea to ask our residents and ratepayers representatives that have come, some from a fair distance, to stand up and identify themselves. Am I right in that? Just to say welcome. All right. Okay, so we will do that. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming here. Lots of familiar faces. Fantastic to see. Some of you I know have come from a fair distance. So thank you very, very much for coming. If you have already signed the petition, we've got copies there. You don't need to sign it again. Some of you have done it online, we know that. But if you haven't and you want to sign the petition, there's copies over there, thank you. So we are going to, first of all, ask Bess Kingy to open the proceedings with a karakia. And we're forever grateful for Bess for doing that. So we'll hand over to Bess for a karakia. Thank you. Thank you, Bess. Okay, we have some apologies for those of you who don't know me, and that's most of you do. I'm Len Salt, I'm the chair of Whitianga Residents and Ratepayers. I am here to help guide and facilitate this meeting, and we really want to get the conduct of the meeting to be an open and friendly forum so that we can get some ideas bounced around and listen to what you have to say. There'll be quite a lot of information that we want to get across to you. Some of it's the background of what's been happening, but some of it will be new information, and there'll be, I think, some revelations, some things that you may not be aware of, and some discussion about where we go going forward. So we have some apologies. One of the purposes of this meeting was to reach out to resident and ratepayers groups across the district and start to get some input from the residents and ratepayers groups across the district to find out what their position is and how they want to work together to proceed for the people that they represent in their own areas and how we can work together. So we've got apologies from some who unfortunately couldn't make it. Jean McCann from Tairua Ratepayers, Mark Bedford from Matarangi, Chris Severn from Opito, and also from Reka, Gary Percival, who's the chair of Mercury Bay Community Board. Even though these folks couldn't be here today, we are in regular communication with them, and there's a lot of exchange of information going backwards and forwards. We've also got apologies from our Mayor Sandra Gowdy, from Gary Towler, who's the Council Emergency Management person, from Councillor Tony Fox, Dennis Tegg from Waikato Regional Council, Gavin Travis from Fire and Emergency New Zealand, he's the National Communications Centre Manager, and from Cabinet Minister Chris Farfoy, who's our NEMA Cabinet Minister. Scott Simpson just called a few minutes before we started. He's been trying to get here, but he got fogged in Queenstown. Unfortunately, has just arrived in Auckland. So he was due to be here, but he's sent his apologies. So in terms of the process and the conduct of the meeting, the purpose of the meeting is to support our Sirens, but also to get a discussion going about what the options might be. If we as a community said we want Sirens, that it has to be accepted that there's a cost to that. The cost may or may not be somewhere in between high and astronomical, or it might be reasonable, because there are a number of options involved and there is a lot of technical parameters, some of which fall into the category of, are our sirens or are our warning systems compliant with current legislation? Now, the legislation that we're talking about goes back to 2014, and I'm going to let David give you more background on this. So we need to have a discussion about that. I just want to also ask everyone in the meeting today, we'll have a question and answer forum a bit later on. It's very important when we have these meetings that everyone is respectful and courteous, and that the conduct of each of us as individuals and as a group is kept mindful and under control. And I have been at a few meetings where people get heated, you know, it's some of the subjects that are being talked about, people get a bit hot under the collar. That's okay, you know, we can understand that, but please be courteous and respectful to each other and to the people who are speaking and to the people who are representing organisations. I don't think we've got any council staff here or any elected representatives, but that's an important part of the way that we go forward, I think, just to be courteous and respectful to each other. So, right, so what I'd like to do is introduce you to David Yeomans. And before we do that, I'll give you a little bit of background on David, which I find... I wonder if, just while I'm getting this ready, I know that we do have some representatives of Residents and Ratepayers Associations. Rob Boston just introduced himself. Rob, can you stand up? Is there anyone else here from Paul, isn't it? Graham, sorry, Graham. Would you mind standing up just momentarily? So, Bob Renton from Pawanui. Oh, you've got a whole crew with you. So thank you very much for coming along. And we look forward to, if you've got any comments or any contribution to make, please do so later on. So, Harry, thank you very much for coming. Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. That is fantastic. Thank you for coming along. Paul and John, thank you. That's awesome. Right. Thanks, Graham. We have met before. I'm sorry about getting your name mixed up. Alistair. Fabulous. Thanks, Alistair. All right, so David Yeomans, and I'm going to have my crew here pull me up if I've missed anything as we go through the agenda. David, from 1981 to 1988, worked at the Civil Aviation Authority, and he was an aircrew examiner and regional aviation inspector, flight testing officer, and airline inspector. So he's got a very, very extensive background in aviation. From 1999 to 2015, he was at Civil Aviation Safety Authority in Australia as a senior air safety auditor and a technical and policy advisor for Internal Audit and Standards Office. Now, along this journey, looking at what's going on with the Sirens, I know David has done extensive background research on the position to get to where we are now and also the options going forward. So I look forward to hearing what David has to say. David, do you want to take questions as you go, or would you rather just work through and then look at questions at the end? At the end. So David's prepared a presentation. I've seen bits of it, very interesting, and I'll hand over to David Yeomans.
Thank you, Betty, for your introduction. Thank you for all persons here representing their various ratepayer bodies and the general public. This presentation is not death by PowerPoint. I hope to be able to go through this very quickly, and if we could have questions and answers at the end, that will be fantastic. So if we could have the next slide, please. When this slide first appeared on my computer, I knew that we were in trouble. This was an alarming piece of news, and coincidentally, with the discovery of this piece of Facebook arrival, our administration officer in the Pawanui ratepayers did another discovery, which was significantly important, that the council had already decided to do away with the sirens in the community. So I come to this. So silencing identified that around early March we had an event which had 3 earthquakes, and all through this process is that the council were aiming to support the mobile alert system. In March, the irony is that the alert to the people came 3 hours after the event. Another quirky part of it is that they signed off on disconnecting the sirens the next day, which was a little concerning. But nevertheless, next slide. So this slide appeared and promoted by Linda Chombley-Smith and was an invitation to start with the petition. Now, I just want to add that the petition currently sits at 1,860 persons, but there's been some very dedicated folk. In Tairua, for example, a group of ladies sat outside the Four Square shop and managed to get over 380 paper signatures. So it identifies the significance of people's input into retaining the sirens. Right, next one, please. Along the way, there are myths and tragedies of truth. There are folk who have made some comments, the Mayor being one. It's not our fault. The government told us to do it. We're only doing our job. Couldn't be, talk about being strangers to the truth. It's not true. The people who set the standards are NEMA, National Emergency Management Authority. They set the standards of having one siren sound for tsunamis. And this is because in the mix of all of the sirens throughout the Dominion of New Zealand is that various agencies use sirens for different purposes, and most of them are durational timings of sirens. And so the National Authority said, if you're going to deal with tsunamis, it's got to be one sound. So they put out the standard. This was done in 2014 with a compliance requirement of 2020. And for us on the peninsula, it's been extended to September of 2021. I don't know the circumstances related to that. And that reminds me, as that lady walks out, is to turn my phone off. Just so bear with me. So, talk to central government. We have. And they have told us unequivocally is that the decision is made by each council. Okay. So, hear that popular myth, put it to bed immediately by telling those who are uninformed what the true story is. I'll come more on this with the next slide, please. Now, this is an extract. So we're talking around March of last year. There was a conversation went on with the Waikato Regional Council Civil Defence with the National Emergency Agency, and the head of the NEMA wrote to the Waikato Regional Civil Defence congratulating them on their decision to support adopting the standards that were put out by NEMA in the first place. But somewhere along the line, there's a disconnect between what happened in Hamilton and what happened in Thames. So if we go to, I commend the position of the Joint Committee, is that the Joint Committee supported the adoption of the siren standard that was being put forward nationally. At the same time, there's a clear pathway and target in regards to the compliance of sirens as a concern. It has been a concern simply because in this period, they had already decided not to fund and not to connect any siren activity. Next slide, please. One of the foibles of this is that the council decided that there wouldn't be any consultation. Now, I don't know if you know about this process. It's called public, what is the phrase? I've forgotten it. Public removed, is that if they make a decision, they can do it in secret. Public excluded, thank you very much. So no public consultation. We're still trying to find that document. We've asked them up front. I've personally asked the Mayor, can I have that document? And the answer is no. We're still going to go ahead and we'll still press the point, and I have another avenue which to explore with the Select Committee about obtaining that document so that we all know what they said. In a moment of frivolity or frustration, I've created this poster. Maybe we should have signs at Kopu or for the peninsula to say you're entering a no siren zone and best of British, because you're not going to be safe in this process. Yeah, I don't know how that went down, but nevertheless. Next one, please. Water break. Where we are. So what was the council's reaction? They declared that consultation would take place in Whitianga, Tairua, Pawanui and Whangamata on the 12th and 13th of April. But their measure of consultation is to tell you what we're going to do. And the what we're going to do did not require you to respond at all. It was to be told what was happening. So for those of you who are harbouring the thought that we can go back to council and talk to them, the answer is no. You've been told. Be good, behave. I did put up a proposal that of the 27 sirens that we have on the peninsula, 18 of them are attached to fire stations or in the proximity of fire stations. Some of them are remote, but they are all owned, operated by FENZ, and FENZ is the Fire Emergency of New Zealand, basically your local fire brigade. The emphasis, I did say with the 18 sirens, it would be nice if they upgraded their sirens to be multi-tonal and would have voiceover capability. I'm going to tell you what they said later in the slideshow. But one of the things that came out of this, if you don't have the Red Cross app on your phone today, you're in harm's way, because the advocacy of the Emergency Management Unit of Thames is that you must have this app on your phone and it must be with you 24/7. Otherwise, you won't receive any alerts. Okay. Right. Just a little pause. So, consultation. Here is a sample of consultation. Could I have the next slide, please? This was put out, and I attended every one of those meetings, and they were all well attended, and everybody in that room expressed concern that they weren't spoken with about what was happening in their communities. I want you to take particular attention to the bottom right-hand side of the official types of tsunami warnings. What's noticeably absent is the symbol for sirens. Now, this is supposed to be a national publication, and I did write to NEMA asking them, do you allow each civil defence unit to have their own way when it comes to publicising what alerts systems are available in their community? And the reply was they can do what they like. I was chastising them about the fact there is a national list of alerting systems, which includes sirens, but for Thames, for Coromandel, this is absent. We did write to the council, pointing out to them that they were, in my opinion, naughty people, and we got told that they can do what they like with their advertising. Okay, so on the side, going from left to right, we have the emergency mobile alert, which is your phone. Okay, that's the primary alerting system that everybody's been pushed to. Then we have TV, we have radio, and we have apps like the Red Cross app and GeoNet. And I know GeoNet is a alerting device for earthquakes, but I wouldn't recommend it to be put on your phone because it goes off every day. New Zealand is the most rocking and rolling country in the world, and we get earthquakes all day, every day. And this thing triggers off in my pocket every time there's a shake somewhere in the country. The Red Cross app is very good in as much as you can program it for you and your family. So if you have a family that's living on any part of the coast, you can actually trigger it. So if there's an event that happens where your family is, it'll come onto your phone. This is consultation. This is consultation to say no. Okay, right, so next slide. On the 31st of September, this is what your siren allocation is going to look like. Nothing. Along the way, there's been an emphasis by the Emergency Management Unit of Thames to say that in your community there are emergency response teams. Those teams have a blueprint for emergency response to the area, and during our travels we've asked each of the communities, do you know any of these people? So I'm going to put it up, a show of hands please. Do you know of an emergency response team in your community? Some. Yeah. A lot of people don't know this, and a lot of people don't know that I did the editing for the Pauanui emergency on behalf of the Emergency Management Unit of Thames, which would have been a blueprint. Basically, the document identifies resources that are available in the community. Unfortunately, it's a confidential document, so it's not well publicised. So for the ratepayer groups here, I would strongly recommend that you find out who those people are and engage them in the community. And I will be taking up the task with the Emergency Management Unit to make sure that the document becomes public. There's no point in having an emergency response plan if it's secret. We all should know where to go. Next. We've been very well supported by media and Alison Smith, who writes on behalf of the Herald. And during this course of discussion, the Mayor said to us, if you want sirens, put it into the long-term plan. We tried that. I tried to find out how that was going to happen, and no one could give me an answer as to how it would happen. So if all the communities put in a response, how would it manifest itself to the community saying that it actually happened? One staffer who I asked, who had been on the long-term planning for quite some time, said, this is a first. We've never done it before, so I don't know how it's going to happen. So the Mayor's promise of saying, put it into the long-term plan, in my opinion, was farcical. Okay.
So just to add to that, because I was at the meeting with David and Linda, and some of you were here also. The first of these consultation meetings on the LTP, at which it wasn't a consultation meeting on the LTP, it was an information meeting on emergency management, happened in Whitianga, and it happened the same day that the LTP consultations closed. So the meeting was at 12:30. LTP consultations closed the same day at 4 p.m. And the Mayor's response was make a submission to the LTP. The rest of the meetings throughout the district happened after the LTP consultation deadline had already closed. It was never in the LTP document, so you were making submissions and responding to a proposed LTP document which did not include anything to do with sirens. And that's what David's referring to. This is a first. Anything that isn't already in the document and hasn't been part of the preparation for the LTP is highly unlikely to get even considered by council, and sure enough, that's what happened. It was just basically, it was a fob off.
I'd like to use the word a farce.
Thank you. But
Is there any indication of the number of submissions that were made, actually how many of them, even despite the, coming afterwards, how many of them did manage to put in something about the LTP?
so that's a very good question. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting David's. But so can I just get your name again? Anton Lambie has just asked, for those of you who couldn't hear at the back, is there any indication of how many submissions were received? That information, I think, is available if you go through, and I'm just working my way through now, all of the LTP considerations, 2 full days that the councillors did. And I'm working my way through those. I haven't reached the end, but the information is there on how many submissions were received on what subjects. I haven't got to that yet.
So that is there. I know the number of submissions are out, but it was how many of them might have referred to the LTP, to the sirens. But if they weren't one of the original questions, would they put it in there? You haven't got the information. Oh, you can't ask for it.
So, good question. I'm working my way through. If I find anything, I'll let everyone know. But so far, I haven't found anything. But it's a very good question. So, sorry, David.
That's
I'll
all right.
shut up now.
It's all a part of the joy of the meeting. So, in the summary of all the players, I came up with this table. From Thames Coromandel District Council is no to consultation, no to financing, no to tsunami sirens, and they've said it twice publicly, and input into the long-term plan, in my opinion, was a complete, utter fob-off, and quite disgraceful. The National Emergency Agency, NEMA, in consultation with them, they're not really fussed about sirens, but they are very supportive of the mobile alerting system, and they are pushing that as a promotional item. The Fire Emergency New Zealand, comfortably known as FENS, they're not happy about sharing their network, and they had 2 senior people accompany Gary Taylor through the consultation of no, identifying their position. And I just want to make a particular point. When we talk about FENS, and when I'm talking about FENS, I'm not talking about the local units. The local units are voluntary people, and so please, I ask all of you, do not take out any animosities or cruel language on your voluntary community people. It's not them that make the decisions, it's up the top. And talking to the top, quite frankly, is very frustrating. They can't even answer one simple question. So they're not happy sharing. They've said that. They said that repeatedly at all the meetings, and they are definitely not happy with having the National Emergency Agency being able to trigger the sirens that are attached to fire stations. So on the 31st of this September, that will stop. We, in consultation with Gary Towler, who's the manager of the emergency unit, the sirens will be available from now until the end of September. We didn't want them quietly disconnecting them. It had to be after September. Right, where are we? And FENS does not do tsunamis. I got that in an email. So FENS don't do tsunamis. NEMA does tsunamis. And I asked them a simple question. Well, if you're going to replace your sirens, what kind of standard are you going to be using? They can't tell me. I asked them, would you think about it having electro type sirens? Would you have voiceover? The answer is emphatically no voiceover. So what standard they're going to be applying will be very interesting. They won't answer that question. So community boards, a little disappointed with the community boards. They tend to react to what the TCDC position was, and the commentary that came back is that they showed very little enthusiasm to support siren replacement on the peninsula. Next slide, please. Did you jump one? No, you didn't. So, media, and we've had Linda on TV, and generally the media have been asking the same question: why would you do away with sirens? So there's a lot of media support coming in, and I'm sure going forward is that after today's meeting, is that we will have more conversation with media in the future. So, losing my place here. Right, next slide, please. So, along the way is if Coromandel District Council won't do sirens, what do? Are they available? They are. And in this conversation, just to backtrack a bit, what we're talking about siren-wise is what we have on the left-hand picture. That is an electromechanical siren. You can't adjust it. You turn it on and it screams. And that is why when they're used right throughout New Zealand, we're talking about duration time. So, and communities use them for different purposes. And that's why the National Emergency Management Agency put out the standard that for tsunamis, it has to be a different sound. So we go from the left-hand picture to the two right-hand pictures. Those are the new electronic sirens that are available. And these are being put in all over the place. It's amazing to find that in the Northern Districts Council, 202 of these sirens are being put in place, and they have a very robust program. They're experimenting with a unit which is similar to the one on the right-hand side. And this unit that they're using comes from Denmark. The company that we have been dealing with is Barton Sound Systems, a local company based in Auckland, but also American Signal Corporation. Now, some of you, or some of the ratepayers were involved with a Zoom meeting with the principal vice president in the States with American Signal. The idea behind that is that ratepayer communities are empowered to talk on technical terms with the principal supplier of the sirens. And incidentally, the vice president happens to be an Australian, which was quite a giggle in our conversation because he couldn't pronounce New Zealand names of the townships. Right, so next slide, thanks. So the question is, how much is all this going to cost? So we asked them basically, what's the basic unit price? Basic unit price for this type of siren is 90,000. How many do you need? We'll come to that shortly. So these can be stacked, and they come in various sound levels. So next slide, please. This is the what I call the pizza delivery siren. And these are very popular around the area. So 75,000 for a basic unit. So the next thing we asked them is about how many do we need, and they very generously gave us an audio mapping capability. So how many do you need in Whitianga? Sorry. Next slide. Here is a range. It's not suggesting for a moment that you need 4. It's just giving a coverage, and it depends on the power of the unit that is chosen. So in the days ahead, if the Whitianga Ratepayers Association champions the replacement sirens for the community, this will be an obvious discussion that will need to happen. So next slide, please. That's Whitianga. Here we are having Cook's Beach. It's only a suggestion. Next one, please. This is Hahei. Next one, please. Pawanui, which my home is. I asked them to start off with, could you provide us with 1 unit which would cover the entire peninsula? That's a sample. The location. At the moment in Pawanui, we have 3 seaward side siren positions, which are coincidentally powered by local sewage power pump units as well.
David, is it worth, you might be coming to this a bit later on, but is it worth just a quick explanation of the decibel readings here in terms of the coverage?
Okay. Is it? All right, I've got to turn the page. This is, I'll talk to this one. This is for a 128 decibel unit, 1 siren of stack, which, so the centre point. The dark red. The dark red, yes. 128. Yes. Then this next. It progressed, unfortunately. You still won't be able to read it. Okay. So the red is 128, and it progressively dissipates as you go away. So the green is 80 decibels, between a range of 75 to 80 decibels. So the question would be, in order to give as much coverage as possible, do you need 1 big unit, or do you need a selection of smaller units? But that's for future discussion. But American Signal and Barton Sounds have been gracious enough to give us this information for free. And when you look at where the current sirens are, I doubt very much if anything was done on audio mapping in the past. Okay, next slide, thanks. Okay, this is what the emergency response teams have publicised. This is Whitianga, and this is going to be a very damp place when you become submerged with a tsunami. I use the phrase, the dandruff of detail. It's when you start looking at this map that you ask other questions about which road would I go on? And apparently in Whitianga is that Centennial Drive is your escape route of choice, right? It's a long way to go if you're in the centre of town. So they ask questions, which other routes, and this is something that the community needs to start thinking about today, is if you're going to choose a route, is it suitable? The link up there, I don't know if anybody has, I think it would be a good idea to send this link to all of the ratepayers, is that this is not easy to find on the Thames Coromandel webpage, but it maps out all the flooded areas for the entire Coromandel Peninsula. So if you trotted that along to your local meeting and showed them what's going to flood, it's the other choices that come out of it. How many roads do we have? A promise that was made to you by the Thames Coromandel District Council Emergency Management Unit was, we'll tell you where to go and we're going to provide you with signs which tell you where to go. So, but the community needs to know how many roads, are they wide enough, are they suitable, and what's at the end? Is it going to be a farmer's paddock? And what's at the end? Is there shelter, food, aerial coverage, anything to support a whole bunch of evacuees? Perhaps a portaloo might be handy. We can't establish that. They won't tell us.
The information's on that site. I think it goes as well as 5 metre waste. So I mean that probably severe. I'd say that's probably 10 metre wide.
Yeah, there's nothing on the particular slide to tell you what it represents.
They need to do that.
They were asked to do that. But coming with this slide, and I can talk, we've in Pauanu, we've just installed a bulletin board where this equivalent is going to be portrayed, but it must come with some other information. It must come with a map that says which road do you use, and the signage that shows you which road to use.
Just an addendum to that, in the long-term plan financials just released, there's nothing in there for sirens, as David's already pointed out. There is $220,000 in the budget for signs. There you go. Thought you'd like to know that.
Yeah. We always like to be told where to go. And so now I've had my little bit. Thank you for paying attention. And John, I'd like to introduce John Grunts. I forgot about this one here. This is your main escape route. Boats only, please. So, and there's the questions that I ask. At the end of at the evacuation point, is there a shelter? A barn would do. You might have some critically ill people who need to be in shelter, water access, cooking access, communication, aerials, all that sort of onward discussion. John, over to you.
Without wanting to be frivolous about this, if we could go back to that last slide. Don't tell them I told you this, but just a little bit around the corner there, there's Councillor McLean's house is up on a bit of a rise just there, so we could all gather at his place.
Quite a serious point there, because actually, when that block's there, nobody can get up Centennial Drive, and if there's flood on at the same time, no one can even get out the main road here. It's absolutely bugger.
But
Maybe the first thing the bloody council should do is fix up the road out there, so people can access the 309 and get the hell out of town.
I can see you are making a submission to the community board on that very subject, and you can be the champion. Thank you, John.
So just a brief introduction for John. Those of you who don't know him, John Grant is the owner of CFM Radio, which is now the radio station with the most coverage right throughout the Thames Coromandel district. I'll let John fill you in, but I know that Whangamata right through to Coromandel, Colville and North.
Yep. Look, I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to talk for very long, so I've got a lot to talk about. So it's going to be pretty much a pressure cooker sort of presentation if you can bear with me over that period of time. So I'm really passionate on the subject. And why am I passionate about the subject? Well, because for 9.5 years, from 2010, my job was running an earthquake response program down in Christchurch and Kaikoura, so I first-hand experienced life in emergency situations. So, forget radio. I'll bring the radio back in a little later on. Why am I standing up here and speaking right now? Because I want to get the message across. This thing can happen, right? It really, really can happen, and you need to be prepared. And, whoever takes responsibility for this, someone has to stand up and do this. This is a really, really important situation for council. The picture that you had up here a few minutes ago of Centennial Drive, or down the bottom of Centennial Drive on Brophy's Beach, is an illustration of what can happen when 2 or 3 things happen at the one time, and that was tidal surges that were coming through because of a low pressure that was sent off the coast, quite a way off the coast, by the way, as well, coupled with some very high tides because we had a full moon happening at that time, and no tsunami, no other issues that we're developing, but we still saw water coming up over this period of time. And look, I can start to recall things like what happened down in Christchurch after the earthquake event, and how difficult communication was over that period of time. You lost cell towers, and cell towers became absolutely inundated with calls. You can imagine what happens the moment there's an announcement that there's something happening, right? Your kids want to find out about what you're doing, they're on the phone talking. You're on the phone talking to people. The whole network is put under significant amounts of pressure. And if this was an earthquake event of some significance, the chances of losing the main power supply are very high as well. That's what happened in Christchurch. So the fallback position, everything has to go back to battery and generator power. Well, I can tell you that I'm not aware of any cell phones that operate anywhere on this peninsula that have generators, right? They have battery power backup facilities, and they last for 4 or 5 hours, and in that time the expectation is someone's going to come along and they're going to put in a generator to be able to keep things topped up over that period of time. So just think about that for a moment or two and the implications of what that actually means. They have to get to those sites. Can they get there? If the roads are in those sort of conditions around the place. So, there are quite a few challenges within that. So the other part of this is my major concern. We've got an older age group population. The adoption of new technology such as cell phones and smartphones is gradually improving, but it's going to take some time for that to happen. When does this sort of event occur? Who knows? The last one that we had March this year, quite a strong earthquake, happened at 2 a.m. in the morning, I think, from memory, 2 a.m. in the morning. So, some people felt it, some people didn't feel it. And some people were woken by it, some people weren't. And, you've just, again, got to be prepared. The timing is really, really significant. I guess if we go to my one and only slide that I have on here, this is a picture of New Zealand, and it's something which, from a geographical point of view, illustrates just how seismically active this country really is. And the Kermadec Trench, which is quite often, or the one that really concerns me and many people, is the Hikurangi Trench, or otherwise known as the subduction zone. So effectively, this is where the Australian plate and the Pacific plate are arguing with each other, and there's a lot of activity going on between those two things. An earthquake of any significance, if we put Japan into perspective here of what happened in 2011 of a magnitude 9 earthquake, you are talking minutes, not hours, minutes before those waves would penetrate through to this area here. So these sort of things, these warning systems and ability to alert become absolutely critical. And, that's the things that I'm really talking about. Now, there are very good systems. The cell phone network alerting systems are really excellent. They can trigger those. I've experienced about 3 of them now, and one of them I was driving down the motorway heading back this way when an alert went off, and I tell you what, nearly took me off the road. So they do certainly give you a good alert system. But people turn the phones off at night, and contrary to what we've been told by councillors of TCDC, they can't turn the phone on to put the alert over. If the phone is off, the phone is off. It won't work. So, the reality is that it's going to rely upon communities such as this to actively do things to be able to alert people themselves as to what is taking place. And then for those people to look after the rest of the community and alert others and have a plan about how that will be actioned around the place to be able to get people to high ground as soon as possible. So finally, I just wanted to touch on the CFM action. When we were launching CFM back in 2018, we had a meeting of local people, mainly business people, who we were appealing to for assistance from a point of view of advertising, to be able to maintain the station. And we had a really good discussion at that group, and the most frequent question everybody asked me was, how good are you going to be in regard to being able to be on air if something goes wrong? What's your backup plan? And I can tell you that we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on that very subject. We are deadly serious about this, and my background fuels the need to be able to do that. Every one of our sites has generators. Our 2 studios both have generator backup as well. We have a plan, if one studio gets knocked out, we can automatically transfer to the other studio to be able to do that. And we have a mobile caravan that can back it all up. If we lose 2 studios, we can still broadcast from the caravan. So we think we've got a plan, and we're local, which is, I think, the other important thing. We make the decisions, we're here, and we will do what we need to do and respond for the community. So, I can tell you a recent power failure that happened in Whitianga. There was 1 station left operating on the air, and that was CFM. And the same thing will be the case through our 5 transmitters that we have surrounding the whole now of the Coromandel Peninsula and much of the Hauraki Plains as well. So, we're here and we're deadly serious, and my appeal and support for Linda and the cause here is also be serious about this point. It is very important.
I'm going to ask John to join us here so that we can get some questions. And David, can we ask you to come up? Sorry, we'll get to you in.
Just going to ask, before we go too much further before your question, that handsome gentleman at the back there, his name is Sam Howells. He's a technical genius, and what he's doing, if you notice the little box in the corner, he's live streaming this and recording the whole process so people can watch it later on and watch it on Facebook. The one rider is, though, if you're asking a question and you're not on a microphone, none of that gets captured. And your questions are really important. We want to hear your contribution and we want to hear what you have to say. So I'm just going to ask, please, if you've got a question, come up to the mic.
This is just a question and a point of information for people in the room, and also, John, for you that you raised. You were talking about how good the mobile phone alerts were. One of the things that came through in Tairua when we were talking with everybody and asking questions, and the ladies were doing their petition, and just even with people in the our Residents and Ratepayers Committee, some of them got the alerts 3 hours later or 20 minutes later or something like that. So it was not, I'm sorry, I think it's really important to make that clear, that the experience that we've had in our community were that those alerts did not come through in a timely fashion.
And look, I totally agree. And I'd add a comment on that, and that is, I think the reality is that you probably can't expect those alerts to come through a lot quicker than that unless it is an absolute clear-cut case of an emergency. When there's any doubt, there's the analysis that is going on as to where and how things should be alerted. Let me take you back to March this year on the earthquake that happened at that particular time. The first alert that came through, because we were there and doing live coverage of it right at 2 a.m. in the morning, the first alert that was actually received came in after the first waves reached the coastline. So, you know, if you're relying upon that alert system, yes, it well could get triggered in the event of a 9 earthquake. They would be right around the country, I would imagine, telling people to move to high ground straight away. But that is why they're trying very hard to get this message across, if it's long and strong, be gone, for that very reason, that you can't rely upon those initial alerts coming through. And I think it's one of the challenges for this is to how does that decision get made and how does the siren get triggered, because there's quite a bit of analysis work, and I think everybody acknowledges that there's a bit of thinking to do on that regard.
Come up to the mic, please. So do you want to go first, and then what's your name? Lindley, if you come up next. Thank you.
Politically challenged. That's right. Just a point, you're talking about cell phones. There is one hell of a lot of areas on this peninsula that don't have cell phone coverage. I'm one. I live at Corriglen. I live right beside a river, which would be affected because the water would come up and flood us. We have no cell phone coverage. I know of people out on the main highway coming into town. They have no coverage. There's many, many pockets that cannot get cell phone coverage. So what are they meant to do?
I agree. There's many of those places around, and you know, I think they're talking somewhere around the 80% mark population-wise. So you know, that means there's a lot of areas where there is no coverage. You know, just drive around, do the circuit around State Highway 25, and you'll lose coverage in many locations around there. So.
I mean, even going from here out towards Corriglen, going back that way, I don't have to go very far out of town before I lose my cell phone.
Totally, yep, it's frustrating. You know, you're in a call to someone, you lose it.
So
Look, I agree. I think the reality also is that the sirens have coverage in particular areas. They don't cover everywhere, and there will be pockets that won't be covered even by sirens, but something effective needs to be done. That, I think, is the key point I'm trying to get across.
Kia ora. The long, strong and get gone, one of our biggest risks here is the Kumiri Trench. We're not going to feel that earthquake. So what's the council considering, and whether it's taking away sirens and taking away this sort of thing, when we're not even going to feel it, but it's liable to be the one that takes out the town.
And in all the documentation that Council is producing, they're actually not saying anything about the fact that Whitianga is one of the top 3 places in New Zealand geographically that will be seriously affected by a tsunami. Us and Gisborne and Wellington are the top 3 in the whole country, but that's not being mentioned anymore. So,
I'd like to make a comment. This was a document that was circulated at Gary Towler's and the FENS representative meetings. There's a classic statement in this, and I have to read it out, and it says, "The days of waiting for authorities to sound the alarm before making a decision on what to do are over." So that says if you're an emergency management unit group, don't rely on us because and they have emphasised this, that the decision-making time may be sufficiently long enough to actually have you drown. So don't rely, if it's long and strong, get gone. So don't rely on them to tell you when to go. You've got to go.
I'll get to you in a second, June. In all of the discussions that we've had so far on this subject, there's a common theme. Every meeting that I've been to gets down to the technical aspects of which alert system, which one has the coverage, which one's going to get to the people, who's got their smartphones on and who's got their smartphones off, who has a smartphone. And in a lot of ways, what happens when we get down into the nitty-gritty of all of these different systems and which works and which doesn't, somewhere along the way we lose the point of what we have to decide as a community. And the point is this, not the technical aspects of what works and what doesn't. The fact is that we don't, once the sirens are switched off, we no longer have that option. Now, Council and the emergency management people are going to present us with a suite of options, which you saw on that slide earlier, and some of those will work and some of those will have limited degrees of effectiveness, and we need everything in that basket of options. What's missing, and David pointed this out very clearly, what's missing is sirens. So the decision that we have to make as a community is this: do we want sirens or not? And if we do, how is that going to be facilitated? Is it going to be facilitated by council, in which case a council going to be pressured by us or by the community or by us collectively to make that happen? And I can tell you now that the position of council as it stands now is they've dug their heels in, and the short answer is no. The second part of the equation is, if we're going to have sirens as an option, are we going to, as a community, find a way to fundraise and pay for those ourselves? And if so, what's involved in that? What's the consenting process? What's the funding process? Even if we as a community got together tomorrow and said, right, we're going to raise some money, we're going to apply to lotteries, or we're going to fundraise or have bake sales or car washes or whatever, we're going to raise the money, we're going to pay for sirens ourselves, where do we put them? Who's going to manage them? Who's going to turn them on? Who's going to consent, or who's going to do the consent applications? The fire and emergency people locally have said quite clearly in discussions that I've had with them, we're not going to turn them on because we are volunteer fire people. We don't know, we're not tapped into the GeoNet services, we're not tapped into the national tsunami alert services. We're often, doing our jobs, we're tradies, we're, at Guthrie Barron or whatever. We don't want that responsibility, and we don't think we're the best people to do it. So these are the questions that need to be asked. Are we going to have sirens as part of the mix? And if we are, who's going to pay for them, and how is that going to be facilitated? And the only reason I'm saying this is because before we get too far down the road of the technical fine detail, the big question needs to be answered first. Sirens, yes or no? Who's going to pay for them?
And that applies to each community. it's each community's decision. And obviously, if communities decide that they do want to procure sirens for their own communities, then there's areas where it would be beneficial for us to work together, like everybody using the same sirens. Long term, that would be the most sensible thing for us to do. So primarily each community, their ratepayers, the folks who came today, thank you very much. Those people need to go back to their communities and a decision made. And effectively, if that decision is made in your community to have a siren, then come the 31st of September, I would say that we want to have our sirens up and running and all the nuts and bolts worked out by then so they're effective.
Sorry, can I just add one more possibility? And this is, in my mind, this is the scenario that I think where council can be involved. Council, as we've said, they're not going to put their hand in their pocket, they're not going to pay for these. But council can play a huge role in facilitating, coordinating and managing the whole process, because nobody is better placed than now Thames Coromandel District Council with their 219 full-time equivalent staff to coordinate this process right across the district. They have the paid staff. They have access to all the consenting and the legal requirements that need to be fulfilled. They are best placed to do it. So even in a worst case scenario, they say, right, we don't want to pay for this, then at the very least, we as a community and as our independent individual residents and ratepayers groups, we can be going to council and saying, okay, we understand that you're not going to pay for this because if you do, it's going to add 3% to the rates or whatever. Why don't you coordinate the whole thing, Mr. Gary Taylor or whoever they appoint to do it? Why don't you coordinate the whole thing? You have the resources to do that we as individuals, we've all got jobs and we've all got busy lives. It's not our job. And unfortunately, I find that I'm having to say this to council more and more often when they say to me in meetings, well, why haven't you done this and why haven't you done that? I'm sorry, that's not my job. You're the guys paid to do this. Why don't you do it? So, okay, we know there's no money and we understand the constraints. Why don't you do the coordination and all the facilitating of the process, and then we can have a conversation as a community about whether we want to raise the money to put these in, even if it's one at a time. So let me just throw that out there as part of the conversation if I can. So.
How many sirens have they suggested that we need? Before you said that we have, would you like to come up?
Yeah, sorry to be a pain about the questions, but we really, and that's a very good point. We really want to hear what you have to say. Jump on that mic, and then we know that it's out there. So.
Earlier you said there was 26 sirens on the peninsula. How many have Barton suggested that we need to have? You showed individual, but as a whole.
As a whole, I'll put it to you this way. At the moment we have 27. 18 of those are attached to fire stations or in the vicinity or can be activated by the fire station. Some of them are remote. That means that there are others which have been financed by community donations and are located in strategic positions. In this conversation with TCDC, one of the things that they said is that if we're going to finance sirens, we need 45. So from 27 to 45. I have asked them, when you did this survey of the 45, where are the additional sirens going? They haven't been able to tell me. If you're talking about a siren allocation per community, those little mapped aerial audio mapping are samples, and the decision is which one do you want, which one will give the best coverage, and just remembering that the sirens probably were never ever identified as being in the right place in the first instance, because they've been there for so long. So I don't know. Has that answered your question? No?
Well, how many have they suggested that we need? We have 27 now. What is Barton suggesting that we'll need?
We haven't asked that question of Barton's, of how many does the Coromandel Peninsula need, but the Emergency Management Unit of Thames have identified that there are 45 potential sites. And of course, this means that the cost would escalate to something like in excess of $9 million. And the problem becomes quite apparent if you take 18 sirens out of the system network, which is the FENS sirens, that means that there's new sirens, new sites, new poles, new power sources, new sets of consenting, and as has been said, is that who is best equipped to deal with this? Obviously, the administration that looks after Coromandel, which in this case it's not doing.
Just a quick comment on the numbers. $9 million sounds like a lot of money. In the long-term plan, 2 examples. Water meters, not the current allocation of water meters, but I think about 3 years down the track, $5.15 million in the budget for additional water meters in the district, and another $3 million in the budget for wheelie bins. So there's over $8 million for water meters and wheelie bins. So as a community, start thinking about what you'd rather have. And it's not for me to decide, but that's part of the discussion. Sorry, can I just take a question at the back and then we'll come to you next?
Paul Revel, and from the Hahei Community Ratepayers Association. I just got a possible word of caution here. If we collectively go down a track of private funding for these sirens, I think it's very important to first of all have it written down or established somewhere who is going to be the person that is going to be responsible for activating the system, because if we have a costly funded system that we've all paid for and nobody's there to take responsibility for pushing the button, then it's pretty useless. So can we bear that in mind? Thank you. Very good point.
So did everyone hear what Paul was saying? So, yep.
I do want to say something. Cost, I'll put it into perspective. Many years ago, I was the lead investigator for an aerial crash which killed 17 people. And during the investigation, which took over 2 years, in the churn of all the discussions, one of my colleagues said, I wonder how much this is going to cost the community. And one of our team went away and churned through the figures and she came back with, on the day of death, and this is quite some years ago now, on the day of death, each person cost the country $4.8 million. And the next question was, is it ever going to stop? The answer is, it never stops. It escalates. And it has all of the community aspects that are associated with it. Ruining of reputation, insurance values, the cost to the individual lives, their family and their community. So $9 million for sirens is a drop in the ocean. Sorry for the pun, but...
So we had a question here, and June put a hand up earlier on, so...
I want to reply to what you said about Thames Coromandel District Council being very, very quiet on the fact that we have the Kermadec Trench. As a past community board member, I attended a workshop where the scientists told us how dangerous it was, and how we had to be very, very careful that we didn't say too much about it. And the more I think about this, the more I think that they are trying to keep us quiet on just how dangerous that is, because the fact is that it's bubbling now, even while we're talking, and apparently it can, once it erupts, we've got about 15 minutes to get away from the coast. And that came out very, very clear at this meeting. So this is why I think that we need a whole range of options to be able to do something in this line. And I'm hoping that everybody here will try and get behind what we finally do in the end, because it's very, very, very important that we do something. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Okay, thank you. Hi, Joyce Birdsall from Tyro Ratepayers. I totally agree with the comments that Len made, that if we are going to fund these sirens, they really do have to be run through the council. There's no point in us all trying to do this in our own communities. And I think it sounds to me as though the council's behaved very badly over this whole process. Have you considered what sort of action that we can take to make the council provide us with more information? A judicial review of their decision making, or official information requests, that sort of thing, because they have to be the central body that runs this. Happy to fundraise if that's required, but we've got to have them on board some way.
Thank you for that. This goes into what happens next, moving forward. Where do we go from here? I think the obvious question is to go back to council and say, if the community funded this purchase of sirens, would you administer it? And I don't know, speculation would be perhaps not. But where do we go next? Whose chain can we rattle to bring this to the attention? So thinking about this, we have a select committee made up of the National Party, made up of List MPs, made up of Labor MPs. And I think that that would be an ideal forum to write to and tell them about what's been happening. Because they are, there's a group there, a select committee who's under administration and governance, and that means that we spread our concerns politically right throughout the country, and they are responsible for replying. They are also in charge of the Prime Minister's department, the emergency department, and so I think that perhaps a nice letter to them would be appropriate.
So this comment probably won't be received all that popularly, but I would just like to throw something in for your consideration, and that is local groups, council groups like TCDC, and in the wider area, the Waikato Regional Council, are under the direction of the Central Emergency Management Service, and as such they have protocols and processes that they have to follow, and therefore any alerts that they do, they can activate locally, but they will do so generally on advice that they receive from the national group that would promulgate things out, particularly in a wider emergency. So I'm not drawing any lines or saying that it's not the right place for this to happen, but when you're talking minutes, you need local, quick decisioning and very good processes to be able to have things in place to make sure those sirens get activated in time to get people out.
Kia ora tātou. I'm Graham Loomis, Mercury Bay South resident and ratepayers. Just first of all, Linda and Len and guest speakers, thank you. It's been a fantastic meeting and so informative. It's been great, and I'm so pleased that, Linda, you talked me into coming, because at one stage the rugby was going to get the better of me. Len, I think you summarised it all, and I can't say from our organisation that we would support the purchase of these, because we've got a committee meeting coming up next week, I think it is, and we will put it to them. But it's a lot of money, and we are already committed to other things such as security cameras, etc. But I think it's a no-brainer, and I think one of the ladies down the front here talked about our council. I'm just absolutely ashamed to be a part of this area, administered by an organisation who just does not care. And to me, they got the message at the last big meeting here unanimously that we all supported the retention. And I think, quite honestly, there must be something else we can do rather than just whinging about it. It's just not good enough. Talk about Donald Trump. We've got our own female version. Thank you.
I'm quite happy to write to the Select Committee. I prefer to do it as an open letter, which could be supported by the various ratepayer groups, should they wish to do so. So we can put pen to paper. I made the comment just recently, it's a pity we don't have a bridge, because we could have got $784 million for cycleway here. But we do have a bridge. It's called Kopu, and we could put a sign there. But if it is the feeling of the meeting, and I go back to your various groups, if you want an open letter drafted to go to the Select Committee, which is the governance body of the Thames Coromandel District Council, to make them aware that they have a problem here. And the demographics of it, we've got 30,000 folks who live in this community. The community rate goes up with holiday periods and to an extraordinary high level. They ought to be told that they're moving into an area where there is no siren protection at all. Over to you.
Peter Lawrence, a long-time local. Listening to the numbers and the difficulties it's going to get for everybody to raise the kind of funds, there is alternatives that I think every one of us is sitting on our own sirens in our own homes. Every car has got a horn, and with mass texting available from a group of all the local concerned citizens, if there is a network of people that are responsible enough to send out a mass text to everybody that wants to volunteer to be on it, that within seconds you put a 300mm zip tie around your horn on your car. If you're lying in bed asleep and you hear a cacophony of 30 or 40, 50, 200 car sirens going constantly, what are you going to think? No $1 million of spending. You've got all the car sirens right around. I'm thinking Whitianga, you'd have within every block, you could have half a dozen car sirens. Most of us have got more than one vehicle, so it's not necessarily the vehicle that you want to escape up Centennial Drive or up the 309 road. But if you've got something that costs us nothing, and you've got a constant siren of all different sizes going constantly, and it's just done through a text that's triggered by somebody that's responsible, I'd be quite happy to zip tie my horn on my steering wheel so it went constantly. And if you didn't understand what that meant within 30 seconds, there's an alternative without having to spend a dime. All right. Smaller communities, smaller beach areas would be perfect for that, and I think that's something worth thinking about and really, really easy to set up. It's just a network of everybody in here saying, yeah, I'm happy to do that, and suddenly the town is awash with noise at any time of day or night, and if it's advertised so they understand what the hell it is with 300 car horns all going at the same time. Do you need all that money spent?
Thanks, Pete. The one thing I absolutely love is creative ideas, things that come out of left field and out of, outside the box. Fantastic. I just love it. So thanks, Pete. I'll hand over to you, but what I'm doing there is I'm starting a process of steps that we might be able to go through, and the first on the list is what Joyce suggested, Official Information Act requests for information. David's offered to do an open letter, and I think that open letter is a fantastic idea. It's going to have a lot more power if it comes from all of the residents and ratepayers groups, and we have that, the power of the wider community behind it. So I think we're moving towards some very concrete steps that we can take to try and get a resolution on this. So.
Mani Goodman, Tairua Ratepayers. I agree with everything that's been said here, but I think, are we not missing a little bit of a point that should we not be making the council be more accountable? I mean, they've just ridden roughshod over us. They've done everything behind closed doors. So is there not something else that we can do to embarrass them? Open those doors. Just a thought.
Thanks, Marnie. What Marnie's just expressed is the absolute frustration, and I can tell you, for those of you who were not at the meeting that where this was discussed, our current mayor, and I'm not here to have a go at the mayor, our current mayor did not want to speak to the people that were at that meeting. She was so, what's the word? No, I'm not going to use the word arrogant. She was so terrified or gun shy or whatever she was going to walk around the room talking to these people and talking to these people. Linda grabbed the gavel, banged it on the table and said, Madam Mayor, we are here to listen to what you have to say, and we are here to listen to what people have to say to you. We want this conversation to be out there. Can we please get this going? And it was only once Linda did that we actually got some discussion happening. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want to have that conversation with people. So can we force them to take action? It's a tough ask, but I think maybe we need to be a bit firmer in what we're doing. So.
Anne Todd from Tairua, and this isn't a residents and ratepayers position, although we sort of have raised it a couple of times just generally in discussion, because we have had, some of you may be aware if you've read the Informer, that we've had major issues with the skate park down there. And it's been highly successful that a very small group of people who are opposed to the skate park have filed an administrative High Court provision for judicial review of the council decision, and it has the council scared. They are going backwards at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and one of the key reasons, as I understand it, that judicial review process is being successful is because there was not proper consultation. And although I absolutely agree with everything, like the Select Committee letter and the suggestion that Joyce raised about the Official Information Act, that would be something that might very quickly stop them stopping the process as at the 30th of September, because there would be a court order that said that they've done it all wrong and that they have to. I mean, I'm not certain that it would be successful, but it certainly has had them very much on the back foot, and the mayor has not been happy about it, and she's trying to come up with other solutions. That's in terms of the skate park. So the thought of perhaps being hit with another judicial review might not be what the council wants.
Thanks, Dan. So that one's going on the list as well. I have to tell you, from my point of view, it's a fascinating idea. The whole legal action thing scares the bejesus out of me because it can end up costing people a lot of money. So, Alistair. Great
Thanks, Len. Just a few points. First of all, Gloria's comments were very relevant about lack of cell phone coverage. We live in Kotunu and we have no cell phone coverage, but also the Kotunu Motor Camp has no cell phone coverage, and that can be a very busy place over Christmas. I'm a geologist, so maybe a couple of geological points here. We're being told long, strong, get going, all that sort of stuff. Well, that's a little bit of rubbish, actually, I think, because there's more and more evidence coming now that New Zealand's divided up into a lot of fault blocks, and you can have a strong earthquake somewhere in the country, which you may not feel because there's faults or things in the way or changes the rock density in the way. You will not feel it, but that tsunami could well be on its way. So the message I have taken from all this is any earthquake, I start thinking, should I be moving? Doesn't matter how strong it is or long. The third point is, I'm sure you guys are aware of the DART boys, D-A-R-T boys. GNS, I think, runs them. I'm not sure 100% about that, but anyway, it's a national system of buoys around the Tonga Kermadec Trench and around New Zealand. These measure, they're on the seafloor, they measure water pressure, and that gives a very accurate estimation of the height of the sea above those buoys. It's a global system started by the Americans around Hawaii. That tells you if a tsunami is coming or not. Now, in this last one in March, it was telling us there was only a few centimeters of tsunami coming, yet we were all being told to evacuate. So there's something wrong with the coordination nationally on this as well. So there are issues we need to address, and I think going back to the lack of cell phone coverage, we need cell phones, we need sirens, and maybe we need car horns as well. That was an excellent suggestion.
Thank you, Alistair. Okay, so I'm somebody who, rather than talk endlessly, likes to end up with a plan of action, even if it's a starting place. So what I'm going to do is come back to what we've got so far, the steps in this process, and please tell me if you're in agreement with this or if there's anything you'd like to add or is there something I've missed out. Step one, we need to come up with a list of questions to Council under the Official Information Act, and I can tell you the little experience that I've had in lodging these, Council respond. They don't like these questions. If you go to them and say, we are going to ask you questions under the Official Information Act, they jump through hoops. They don't like them. So that's a fantastic idea. Thank you, Joyce. We draft an open letter, and David's offered to do that. The letter will be to Council, but I think copies to the government as well. Waikato Regional Council. Troy is going like this. Everybody, blast it out there. Open letter means it goes right out to the public and everywhere. But it gives us a framework from which to work. The crowd sirening idea from Peter, I love it. I don't know if it's got a place in this framework, these steps, because it comes back to the idea that we're getting down into the technical details. What we want to do is not lose sight of the overall picture. Just touching very briefly on Marnie's point about the threat of legal action, one of the problems I think that the Council has is that it was a legal standard that was imposed by the government for the Council to follow, which they have not followed. Therefore, they're on a hiding to nothing because. And here's an interesting little trivia point that a lot of people don't realise. I found this out the other day. The reason why the standards were reviewed and imposed is because one of the local district councils in New Zealand asked the government to review these standards and make sure that they were a national standard that applied across the board. Guess which council it was? I kid you not. It was Thames Coromandel that asked them over 6 years ago to review the standards and put this, and now this council is the one that hasn't complied and so the sirens are being disconnected. Judicial review, threat of legal action. I think it's something that we could probably find a friendly lawyer and get some legal advice on that and say, hey, is this an option? Even just holding that over the head of council might have some kind of effect, and I think it's a great idea. So, sorry. Don't get me started on my favourite subject. I know they did. Yes. Dennis, Waikato Regional Council, Dennis Tegg, I think that's worth following up. Have I missed anything? That'll get us started.
Adi Collier, Wharikaho and Simpsons Beach Ratepayers Association. I did discuss briefly with Murray on one occasion about involving the Ombudsman, and that can be quite effective. Just an idea. Maybe for the open letter. Murray Ward.
From Wharikaho. So. That's a very good point, and maybe we could tap into someone who knows a little bit more about the Ombudsman's role and what part that can play. Cheryl.
Kia ora tātou, Cheryl Fitzpatrick. I'm a member of the Resident and Ratepayers Association here, and Nanaia Mahuta is your Minister of Local Government, and I think maybe penning something to her or including her in that would, might get you some results.
Linda, can you add that to my list, please, Nanaia Mahuta? Okay, so we have some steps that we can take, and what I'm guessing is that what we've got is the first stage in a process. I'm going to be travelling around a little bit, meeting with the other residents and ratepayers associations throughout the district. I'm happy to coordinate this process as far as I'm able to, but it's going to take basically a lot of involvement by a lot of people, but I'm happy to work through that in terms of liaising and coordinating to the extent that I can. So,
Len, can I just say that over 3,000 people have said that they want sirens, and a lot of the communities have said that their communities want sirens, but you actually haven't gone back and really spoken to your communities and got a proper consensus from them. So could I suggest that perhaps there's a time put on that process? I know a lot of people are already in the process of sending out newsletters to their ratepayers right now, so maybe that can be incorporated, but maybe get that done in a month or a couple of months, because September's going to roll around very quickly. And I'd just like to add to that whilst there is the idea that it's a lot of money to raise, as David said, you've only got to look at it at the cost to human life, our infrastructure and so many other things. If we have a tsunami here, the damage would be huge. That's nothing compared to the life that could be lost in that here. So I'd just like to say that in terms of fundraising, there are people who have already come forward that have offered significant commitments to purchasing sirens. And I think that if it was made available in your communities in a fundraising way, you would be surprised who would come forward. I mean, some of the folks in Matarangi have said it doesn't matter what it costs, we're doing it, and people will provide the funds for it to happen. And people have already come forward in Whitianga too. So I think that once the communities know about it, you'll find that people will start coming forward if that's the decision in your communities.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I think one of the things that we might have to do is put together a briefing paper with basically a fact sheet, essentially based on the research and the work that David's done already, but a fact sheet which can go out to the members of the Residents and Ratepayers Associations and to the wider community, so that people, when they're having this discussion with the members, have some information on which to base this. So what are the options? What are the styles of sirens and alerting systems available? Without wanting to do, without wanting to add huge amounts of work to what David's done already, because I know he's done a phenomenal amount, but a briefing paper which is short, concise, to the point, but which gives people some of the information upon which they need to have their discussions. So this handsome gentleman over here who gave me his card, Keith.
Hi, my name's Keith Crow. Bit of a technical guy. I own a company called Tech Ends Limited. Me and another chap we've been working on a system. It just happened by random that we're doing it at the same time as this is happening. So it's a disaster disaster warning system, and it's linked in with NEMA. When they announce a tsunami, we know about it in 20 seconds. And then our system sends off alerts somewhere, wherever they're located, and that's within seconds. So the lady down there, do you have internet access? You would know about it. Yeah. Well, you'd know within 30 seconds that NEMA has sent out a warning. So we had initially invented it for schools. So the schools we thought was where a lot of population was, and we'd put in air raid sirens because we thought that they were the best, better than audio-based. They go for kilometres. They're really good, and you can get them pretty cheap as well. So, yeah, as inventors, we want to help people, and putting an air raid siren on top of a power pole in someone's backyard, you can have your own private one. And our system monitors every point, so we know it's not working, and it's just a little monthly cost. Yeah. So that's what we're working on, and we're really close to finishing it, so we're running soon. Yeah.
So from what you've heard, from what the information
Yeah.
got, do you think you've got a deal for us?
Yeah. So it's not necessarily for schools. You can be adapted for other things. Sorry?
It won't cost $9 million.
No, it doesn't cost $9 million. I come from a dairy farm. We don't like to spend money. So when I was younger, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Keith made a very good point about coming from a dairy farm, and one of the discussions that I've had recently with a number of people in the community is that a lot of the people in the Thames Coromandel district, especially retired people, are retired tradesmen and farmers and plumbers and drain layers and chippies and electricians, and when something needs doing, you get stuck in and you do it. And this keeps coming up again and again, and the one that really rankled me recently is the 4 posts that they put in around town here to tell people that this crossing is not a pedestrian crossing, okay? Because people kept walking across these thinking it was a pedestrian crossing, so they put 4 posts in with a little steel cap on them and a little sign on it. $9,200. Now I looked at that and I thought, geez, I know half a dozen guys that I could pick up the phone right now and say, hey mate, we need 4 of these downtown. We've got a budget of $1,000. Can you do them for that? They're 100 by 100. What? Yeah, no worries, I can do that. We'll have them done for you tomorrow. Now, there's too much of this going on where consultants get used, and I'm getting sidetracked a little bit here, but what this meeting demonstrates is that as a community we can come up with creative solutions, whether it's car horns or whether it's private enterprise coming up with ideas. There are different ways of doing things that we can do, and it doesn't cost the earth. However, there's got to be some kind of coordination. There's got to be, and people like John, who has a system in place and who already has a network that he's invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in, working together, we can come up with creative solutions. So let's try and find a way to make it happen. Yep, you're on the payroll, mate. Same pay rate as me.
Just as an offer for the ratepayer representatives, you're quite welcome to take away the, or have it sent to you, the PowerPoint program, which may or may not facilitate your discussions with your fellows. So we can send that out to you.
Hi, my name's Graham Christian. I just want to say, firstly, John, that what you presented today was quite exceptional and gave us a really good overview of your experience and what is actually physically and personally experiencing both Kaikoura and Christchurch. I think that's quite incredible. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. Linda and I are good friends. We go back to Preserve New Chum days when she asked me to be the chair of that, and we have a long history, and she asked me to support this, and I said that I would, I'm happy to provide an initial $10,000 and we can see where that goes to. And my view here today is a lot of this work is done on the back of goodwill and good ideas. Linda and the team, I'd be happy if my $10,000 was used towards legal fees, consultancy, and I suspect some other people in the room would do the same, because we do a lot of this pro bono and we don't quite get the answers that we need, and we don't get quite the direction that we require, so that's my offer. The one thing that I'm not quite clear on is what we're actually asking. Are we saying to these bodies, we've determined that this is the outcome that we want, and then the various parties that we're talking to, like the open letter to council, the open letter to the WRC, a judicial review, legal action, the ombudsman, and I understand all of these processes, by the way, and talking to Naya Mahuta, with whom I was at university with, and Andrew Bailey, another MP who has a place at Matarangi, and so on and so on. We all have those networks, but what is the question we're asking?
Carolyn.
Len, I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Are you running for mayor?
Carolyn, thank you for your question. This is neither the time nor the place, but I appreciate you. And you're not having the microphone, sorry. There you go, Troy.
Sorry, hi Troy, I'm a local. David, you mentioned FENZ was responsible for 18 of those and that they had no intentions of wanting to. Have they been used in the past? Are they ones that were used for emergencies in the past?
Correct. The benefit of having local sirens is that they're used for durational period. So usually, I'll use Pawanui as the example, 45 seconds for an emergency call out. That's to get their people to the station for marine, fire, human emergency or road crashes. Then you stick the siren on for a longer period of time and just leave it going. And that was the signal for tsunami. But that's not hasn't been universal right throughout the country. So when you take away 18 of those on the peninsula, yes, which are 18 fire station sirens, they have to be replaced. And that means that's new poles, new power, new locations, new sirens, and the siren choice is either noise and voice over capability. Now, some of the communities that are installing these new sirens have a particular choice of warning because it's peculiar to their location. There's one town further south that has a dam problem. So if the spillway is activated, they put off the siren and they put out the voice to say that this is what the emergency is. So there's a variety of choices.
My question is, I was thinking we're angling towards the council and what they are basically not doing, that they should be doing, because that's what they're paid to do. But the other point is that FENS, how can it call itself an emergency network if they aren't providing the service in an emergency? I don't know how they can say we don't do tsunamis. That seems kind of inane to me. So
yes.
I think perhaps if we're sending out or putting on notice or something to the council, perhaps we should be doing it to FENS and drawing attention to the nation, the nation's attention to the fact that our national emergency service doesn't want to do emergencies.
Correct. I did think about this, and I asked myself the question, what do FENS people do?
Yes.
And I came up with the idea is that FENS have openly said they deal with debris. They don't do tsunamis, right? Which is quite ironic when they get told to move their emergency equipment to high ground. Now, I've not seen that before, but in the last emergency, all of the fire station units were told to take their fire trucks and put them to higher ground because they didn't want to have them washed away.
Folks, we've got a question from Bess. You've all been here and what fantastic contribution for a couple of hours. So I'm going to start winding up, but we'll take a question from Bess. Anyone else who's got a really burning question, we'd love to hear from you, but we'll start winding it up.
Kia ora. I just want to reply to this lovely Wahine's, her comments about FENS not being an emergency department, call it what you will. It's like saying, I'm a nurse, but I'm not looking after people. So, and my next question is, I'll cut to the chase to what Graham said. What are we asking? Otherwise we're going to be here all night.
Yeah. The question is, do you want sirens on the peninsula or not? Right, so the answer is yes. So how do we go about getting the sirens that we all want back onto the peninsula? Now, you won't get it by 31st of September this year. That's not going to happen. So in September, it'll become very quiet. You will not get a siren triggered at all. Yeah. Yeah, all of those solutions need to be spoken of, and it becomes part of the matrix of how we protect our community. One of my favourite discussions, and it always draws the comment, you're just being a smart-ass, is that single points of failure are quite often identified after tragedy, right? It would be nice if we had the foresight to look at those potential fail points or single points of failure before we had to use them. And the examples are very obvious. Kaikoura with its single road, Marsden Point with its single access of oil access to Auckland, Ashburton just recently, one bridge. Are they talking about having a second bridge? It would have been nice for them if they had had a community group that was thinking about that before the need was arising. So it's the same issue here. Do we need sirens? Do we need 27? Do we need 45? All of those questions need to be answered.
So what we need to do, in my opinion, is to put it to the council that you have treated us badly. We need to have your attention. And while we're doing that, we're going to inform the rest of New Zealand how badly you've treated us. And we want our sirens back. Please.
So just to answer Bess's question, and she's really nailed it, I think, what are we asking for? And that, to my mind, is very clear. First of all, do we want sirens? And I think the answer to that, and given that we've got, I think, close to 3,000 signatures already on that petition. So there's 3,000 signatures as a starting point to say, yes, we want sirens. We disagree with the council disconnecting the ones that we've got. So yes, we want sirens. Next part of the question is, who's going to pay for them? And the third part of the question is, and I think is critically important, who is going to manage the operation of those sirens? So do we want them? Who's going to pay for them? And who's going to manage them? 3 key questions that we need to... what Bess says, I think, is very relevant, and it comes back to the community being involved, hands-on, in the same way that we have community patrols, in the same way that we have service organisations like Lions. Sometimes the community's just got to get stuck in and do things when council doesn't put their hand up and things don't get done. So I'm going to say thank you very much. Sam has asked me to let you know that there is a link if you want to forward this meeting and this discussion on to people that you know who might be interested. Go and see Sam. He will give you a link which you can click on and you can go to a recording of this meeting. And I want to thank Sam for doing all the technical side. I want to thank Linda and David for a huge amount of work that went into putting this all together. So please put your hands together and thank them. I want to thank the people, Rob Boston and Joyce, and all the people who came from different parts of the district to join us at this meeting. And thank you all very much for coming and taking part and for your fantastic contributions. Very much appreciated. Kia ora and thank you and have a great day.
There was mentions of consent. What consents would be required about resource consent? Well, the resource consent, the building consent, yeah. I was wondering whether it's because of a specified system or not, And it also means that if you're a household and you found out somebody gets stuck outside your place, but in that case, you probably wouldn't mind. Yeah. So it's a resource. Okay. Well done.
I'll just have a quick word with you. I'm Cheryl, and my other role is I'm on the Thames Community Board. We were told unequivocally by Gary Towler that this was a national decision and we had no choice in the matter. And I wasn't going to get up here and say that, but basically, yes. But we do obviously have a choice in the matter. Yeah. Yes, I was part of that. Yeah. And it was great.